We have to go? Andrew knows everything. Beth's voice was barely louder than the music drifting through our son's new living room. But something in it cut through every laugh, every clink of champagne, every polite conversation around us. I turned toward my wife and saw that she had removed the small gold name pin Madison had given her at the door. She pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. For 46 years, I had known Beth as a woman who could remain calm through almost anything. She had raised our son, cared for her parents, balanced our household budget, and stood beside me through every difficult season without once making her pain someone else's burden. But that evening, beneath the warm lights of Andrew's new home outside Raleigh, her face had gone perfectly still. "What happened?" I asked. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she opened her purse and showed me a photograph on her phone. It was the first page of a legal document resting on a dark wooden desk. Across the top were the words "conversion of family loan to irrevocable gift." Below them were our names, Robert and Elizabeth Sullivan, followed by the amount we had loaned Andrew for the down payment on this house, $240,000. At the bottom of the page was an empty line waiting for Beth's signature. "Where did you find this?" I asked. "In the study," she said. "But the paper is not why we are leaving." Across the room, Andrew stood near the marble fireplace with one hand resting on Madison's shoulder. He looked relaxed, proud, like a man enjoying the life he believed he had built entirely on his own. Guests surrounded him, admiring the high ceilings, the wide windows, and the carefully arranged photographs on the walls. I had spent nearly 3 months helping supervise the renovations. Beth had spent weeks reviewing loan documents and moving money from the savings we had built over decades. Yet there was not one photograph of us anywhere in that house. Madison had displayed pictures of her own parents, her college friends, the designer, and even the real estate agent. Beth and I had been left out as neatly as if we had never existed. "What did Andrew say?" I asked. Beth looked at our son, then back at me. Her eyes were dry. That frightened me more than tears would have. "Madison was worried I might refuse to sign," she said. "Andrew told her I would do it because I have spent my whole life proving I am not selfish." For a moment, I could not hear the music anymore. Our son had not misunderstood his mother's kindness. He had studied it, counted on it, planned around it. Beth slipped her phone back into her purse and straightened the sleeve of her pale blue dress. "Madison expects me to make a scene," she said. "Andrew expects me to obey. Tonight, they will receive neither." Then she took my arm, and together we walked toward the front door. The moment we stepped outside, the cool September air settled around us, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and rain from somewhere beyond the neighborhood. Beth did not look back at the house. She walked beside me toward our car with the same measured pace she used every Sunday morning when we crossed the church parking lot, but her hand remained tight around the strap of her purse. I unlocked the passenger door and waited until she was seated before walking around to my side. Neither of us spoke until the house disappeared behind a row of young maple trees. That morning had begun so differently. Beth had been awake before sunrise, standing at the kitchen counter with a soft cloth in one hand and an old brass key in the other. The key had belonged to our first home, a modest 3-bedroom house where Andrew had learned to walk, lost his first tooth, and practiced throwing a baseball against the garage door until the neighbors complained. Beth had kept it in a small wooden box after we moved. She polished it until the worn edges caught the morning light, then placed it inside a blue velvet case. Beside it, she folded a handwritten letter. I had watched her write it twice because the first version did not feel warm enough. "A house becomes a home when the people inside remember who helped them reach the door," she read aloud. Then she smiled and asked whether it sounded too sentimental. I told her it sounded like her. We had given Andrew the $240,000 18 months earlier, when the bank approved his mortgage, but the down payment remained out of reach. It was not money we had found easily. It came from years of packed lunches, used cars, careful vacations, and the retirement account Beth had guarded more faithfully than most people guarded jewelry. We had insisted on a written loan agreement, not because we distrusted our son, but because our attorney said love and paperwork should never be confused. There was no interest, no pressure. Andrew could begin repayment after the renovations were finished. Beth had even suggested delaying the first payment if the move became expensive. She never wanted gratitude in public. She never asked for her name on a wall. She only wanted honesty. Before we left home that afternoon, she held the velvet box against her chest and said, "Maybe tonight will be different." I knew what she meant. For nearly 4 years, every family dinner had become shorter, every holiday invitation later, every conversation with Andrew filtered through Madison. Beth kept finding reasons to excuse it. Young couples needed space. New jobs created stress. Marriage changed routines. She defended them so often that I sometimes wondered whether she was trying to convince me or herself. Now, as we drove through the darkening streets outside Raleigh, the blue velvet box remained unopened in her purse. Beth turned toward the window and watched the passing houses, each one glowing warmly from within. "I thought I was bringing him a piece of home," she said quietly. Then she placed her phone face down between us as Andrew began calling. Andrew called 3 times before the road curved away from the neighborhood. Beth did not answer. She kept her eyes on the dark windows passing beside us, while I found myself replaying the moment we had arrived that afternoon. The house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, for 1,200 square feet of pale stone, black shutters, and tall windows reflecting the late September sun. Madison had chosen white flowers for the front steps and small lanterns along the walkway. Everything looked deliberate, polished, ready to be admired. Andrew met us at the door with a quick hug, but his attention shifted almost immediately to a group of co-workers behind us. Madison kissed the air beside Beth's cheek and handed each of us a small gold name pin. Mine read Robert Sullivan, father of the host. Beth's read Elizabeth Sullivan, mother of the host. Madison's parents wore pins that said Diane and Charles Parker, founding family. I noticed the difference. Beth pretended not to. Inside, the marble kitchen counters gleamed beneath pendant lights, and trays of appetizers covered the island. Guests wandered from room to room praising the wide plank floors, the glass doors, and the view of the neighborhood pond. I recognized nearly every improvement because I had helped plan many of them. I had spent weeks meeting contractors, checking measurements, and driving 40 minutes each way when Andrew could not leave work. Yet when Madison introduced me to her friends, she said only, "Robert is retired now, so he had plenty of time to stop by." Beth heard it. She looked at me, then adjusted the blue velvet box in her purse. The largest wall in the living room had been arranged like an exhibit. Across the top, in silver letters, were the words "the people who made this possible." Beneath them were framed photographs of Madison's parents touring the property, Madison laughing with the interior designer, Andrew standing beside the real estate agent, and several friends holding paint samples. There was even a photograph of Madison's college roommate bringing coffee during the renovation. There was not one picture of Beth. There was not one picture of me. Caleb Morris, the contractor who had worked on the house, approached with a glass of iced tea in his hand. He stared at the wall, then at me. "Robert, where is your picture? You practically lived here for 3 months." Madison appeared before I could answer. Her smile remained bright, but her voice became tighter. "The wall is more about the creative journey," she said. "Robert mostly helped with practical details." Caleb raised his eyebrows. "Those practical details saved them a great deal of money." A small silence formed around us. Beth stepped closer to the wall and studied each photograph without speaking. Then she noticed the engraved plaque beneath the display. It read, "Built through hard work, independence, and the unconditional support of the Parker family." Beth touched the edge of the blue velvet box through her purse. "It is a beautiful display," she said. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Madison thanked her and turned toward another guest. I watched my wife stand there beneath a wall that celebrated everyone except the 2 people who had made the first payment possible. That was when I understood the house had not merely been decorated without us. We had been removed from its story. By 7 o'clock, nearly every guest had gathered in the living room for the toast. Madison stood beside the fireplace with one hand resting lightly on Andrew's arm. Behind them, the silver letters above the photograph wall caught the glow from the chandelier. Beth and I stood near the back, close enough to hear, but far enough to be overlooked. Madison lifted her glass and thanked the designer, the real estate agent, the contractors, and the friends who had supported them through what she called a long and independent journey. Then she turned toward Diane and Charles Parker. "Most of all, we want to thank my parents," she said. "Their unconditional support made this home possible." Applause filled the room. Diane pressed one hand to her chest, while Charles nodded with quiet pride. Andrew smiled beside them. He did not look toward us. Beth held her glass of sparkling water with both hands. She had not taken a sip since we arrived. A woman standing near Caleb glanced at the wall, then across the room at me. Did Andrew's parents help with the house too? She asked. The question was friendly. Simple. Madison answered before Andrew could speak. They contributed advice, she said with a laugh. A great deal of advice. Several guests chuckled politely. Beth lowered her eyes to the white linen covering the refreshment table and smoothed one small wrinkle with her fingertips. Caleb did not laugh. Robert did more than give advice, he said. He was here almost every weekday for 3 months. He caught errors before they became expensive, coordinated deliveries, and helped us keep the project on schedule. The room grew quieter. Madison's smile did not disappear, but it became thinner. Robert had recently retired, she replied. We thought giving him a project would be good for him. This time, no one laughed. I felt heat rise beneath my collar, but Beth touched my wrist before I could speak. Her hand was cool and steady. She knew me well enough to recognize the words forming in my mouth. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Not here. Not now. Andrew cleared his throat and thanked everyone for coming. He spoke about hard work, sacrifice, and building a future without depending on anyone else. Each sentence felt carefully prepared. Each one removed another piece of the truth. $240,000 had crossed from our account into his. I had spent hundreds of hours at that property. Beth had reviewed every document, delayed plans for our own retirement, and told Andrew he could repay us slowly. Yet we stood at the edge of the room while he described himself as entirely self-made. After the applause, Madison began guiding guests toward the dining area. Beth placed her untouched glass on the table. She folded her napkin twice, aligned its edges, and rested it beside the glass. I need to find the restroom, she said. Before I could offer to go with her, an older guest named Mrs. Whitaker approached and asked whether Beth had seen the coat room. Beth smiled, offered to help, and walked toward the hallway leading to the study. I watched her disappear beyond the doorway. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When she finally returned, the color had left her face, but her steps remained measured. Her purse was closed tightly beneath one arm. She did not look at Madison. She came directly to me, placed her fingers around my sleeve, and spoke in a voice only I could hear. Robert, we are leaving now. Beth did not explain until we were inside the car with the doors closed and the house lights shrinking behind us. She kept her purse on her lap and stared through the windshield for several seconds before speaking. Mrs. Whitaker's coat was hanging near the study, she said. The door was partly open. I waited. Beth reached into her purse and took out her phone. She opened the first photograph and handed it to me. The image showed a gray folder on a dark wooden desk. The title across the top read Family Loan Conversion Agreement. Beneath it were our names and the amount of $240,000. The document stated that the loan would be reclassified as an irrevocable gift with no obligation for repayment. There was another paper beneath it, Beth said. She moved to the next photograph. It was a printed speech with Madison's name at the top. Several lines had been highlighted in yellow. One sentence stood out clearly. We are proud to say that we built this life without financial assistance from either family. I read it twice. The lie was not careless. It had been written, printed, and prepared for an audience. Beth folded her hands over her purse. She planned to thank her parents publicly, get my signature privately, and then tell everyone we had contributed nothing. Her voice remained calm, but each word landed with the weight of something carefully measured. I asked whether Madison had seen her taking the photographs. Beth shook her head. I was about to leave when I heard Diane coming down the hall. She had stepped behind the study door, intending to avoid an awkward encounter. Madison entered with her mother a moment later. Diane asked whether the bank had approved the refinancing. Madison said approval depended on removing our loan from the property records. She explained that once Beth signed, the house would appear to have been financed without family debt. Diane asked why they had not simply requested the change openly. Madison replied, because Robert would ask questions, and Beth would feel guilty enough to sign if Andrew made it sound necessary. Beth paused there. The tires made a soft rhythm against the pavement as we passed rows of darkened storefronts. Then Diane asked what would happen after the papers were signed. She continued. Madison said they could finally establish proper boundaries. Fewer visits. No unannounced calls. Holidays divided more fairly. I knew what more fairly meant. It meant Christmas with the Parkers, Thanksgiving with the Parkers, and perhaps lunch with us sometime in January. I asked whether Andrew had been part of that conversation. Beth looked down at her phone. He came in before they left. She opened the final photograph, but it was not another document. It was a picture of the study doorway reflected in a framed mirror. Andrew stood beside Madison, holding 2 champagne glasses. Beth had taken it without thinking, her phone still raised near her purse. Madison told him I might refuse if I felt insulted tonight, Beth said. He told her not to worry. I already knew the sentence that followed, but hearing Beth repeat it made the silence inside the car feel smaller. He said I would sign because I had spent my whole life proving I was not selfish. Beth locked the phone and placed it face down between us. He was not confused, Robert. He was not pressured. He knew exactly which part of me to use. For several miles, neither of us spoke. The road stretched ahead beneath a line of streetlights, and the glow from Beth's phone disappeared when the screen went dark. I wanted to turn the car around. I wanted Andrew to look his mother in the eyes and explain why he had reduced 40 years of love to a weakness he could use. Beth seemed to sense the thought before I said it. Do not go back, she said quietly. Not tonight. I tightened my hands around the steering wheel. They lied about the money. They planned to erase us. He stood there and let Madison make a joke out of everything we did. Beth looked through the passenger window. That is exactly why we are not going back. Her voice was steady, but I could see the pulse moving at the base of her throat. Madison expects anger. Andrew expects obedience. If we return, she will call me emotional, and he will ask me to calm down. Then everyone will remember the scene instead of the reason for it. The first call came before we reached the highway. Andrew's name appeared on the dashboard screen. Beth watched it ring until it stopped. A few seconds later, Madison called. Then Andrew again. Beth reached forward and silenced the phone without answering. At the next red light, a message appeared. You left. Before the family photograph. Madison is humiliated. Beth read it once. Her expression did not change. Another message followed. Please do not make this evening about you. I felt something inside me settle into a colder place. Not once had he asked whether his mother was all right. Not once had he wondered what she might have seen or heard. His concern was the photograph, the appearance, the story Madison wanted the guests to remember. Beth turned the phone face down on the center console. He thinks the worst thing that happened tonight was our empty place in a picture, she said. He does not understand that he has been removing us from the picture for years. When we reached home, the porch light was still on. Beth entered first and placed her purse on the kitchen table. She removed the blue velvet box, opened it, and looked at the old brass key resting inside. For a moment, she ran one finger over its worn edge. Then she closed the lid and carried it to the cabinet where we kept important family papers. She did not throw it away. She did not tear up the letter. She simply put both items behind the folder containing Andrew's original loan agreement. What happens tomorrow? I asked. Beth took 2 coffee mugs from the cabinet and set them beside the machine for morning, as if preparing for an ordinary Sunday. He will come here with the papers, she said. He will bring coffee. He may bring breakfast. He will act as though nothing happened because that has always worked before. She turned off the kitchen light and looked at me across the dim room. This time, he is going to explain every page before he learns that I already know what it says. Andrew arrived at 9:15 the next morning carrying 2 cardboard cups of coffee, a white bakery box, and the same gray folder Beth had photographed the night before. He smiled when I opened the door, but the smile looked arranged, like the flowers on Madison's front steps. I thought we could talk before church, he said. Beth was already seated at the kitchen table. She had set out 3 plates, 3 forks, and the blue velvet box beside her coffee mug. Andrew noticed the box, then looked away. I brought those cinnamon rolls you like, he said. Beth thanked him and invited him to sit. She did not mention the party. She did not mention the messages. She poured his coffee the same way she had when he was 16, leaving room for cream and adding 1 packet of sugar. Andrew opened the bakery box and began talking about traffic, the weather, and how many guests had stayed after we left. He said Madison had been upset because the family photograph looked incomplete. Beth listened without correcting him. She cut 1 cinnamon roll in half and placed the smaller piece on her plate. Andrew waited until we had finished eating before sliding the gray folder across the table. This is just a banking form, he said. The refinance will lower our monthly payment, but the lender needs the original loan listed as a gift. Nothing really changes between us. Beth rested both hands around her coffee mug, then explained each page. Andrew blinked. Each page. Yes, she said. Slowly, he opened the folder and began reading the summary. His voice became less certain when he reached the section stating that the $240,000 would no longer be owed. He called it standard language. He said the bank required clarity. He said families handled these things informally all the time. Beth did not interrupt. When he finished, she asked, "Will you repay the money after I sign?" Andrew glanced at me. "Not officially. But that is not the point. Will you tell people we helped you buy the house?" His fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. "Mom, this is not about recognition." Beth opened her phone and placed it beside the papers. The first photograph showed the conversion agreement. The second showed Madison's prepared speech. The third showed Andrew reflected in the study mirror. He stared at the screen without touching it. Beth's voice remained level. "Which lie did you expect me to sign first?" The color left his face. He said Madison had written the speech before the bank made its request. He said the wording was unfortunate. He said she had only wanted the evening to feel positive. Beth asked whether he had told Madison she could rely on his mother's fear of appearing selfish. Andrew looked down at the table. That silence lasted longer than any answer could have. "Finally," he said, "I knew you would help us because you always do." Beth reached for the pen beside the folder. Andrew exhaled, believing the conversation had ended the way he expected. She picked up the pen, held it for 1 second, then placed it on top of the blue velvet box without removing the cap. "My generosity was never your permission," she said, "and my love was never a blank signature." She closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. "There is nothing here for me to sign." Andrew remained seated for several seconds, staring at the closed folder as if the pages might change if he waited long enough. Beth lifted her coffee and took one quiet sip. I had seen that expression on our son before, usually when life refused to follow the plan he had already written in his head. "Mom, you are making this much bigger than it is," he said. Beth set the mug down carefully. "No, I am finally seeing how large it has always been." Andrew looked at me, hoping I would soften the moment. I did not. He began gathering the papers, speaking faster now. He said the refinance would save them nearly $800 each month. He said Madison had already planned how to use the extra money for landscaping and new furniture. He said the bank might reject the application if Beth refused. Each sentence made the truth clearer. They had already spent the benefit of her signature before asking for it. Beth listened until he stopped. Then she opened the cabinet behind her and removed the original loan agreement. "Karen Whitmore will manage this from now on," she said. "You will receive a formal payment schedule this week. All questions about the loan will go through her office." Andrew's face changed. "You are bringing an attorney into a family matter?" "The attorney was involved when you signed the agreement," Beth replied. "You only stopped calling it a family matter when you wanted the debt erased." He pushed his chair back and stood. His cinnamon roll remained half-eaten on the plate. "Madison was right," he said. "You are using money to control us." Beth did not raise her voice. "Control would be telling you how to live in exchange for my help. I am doing the opposite. You may live exactly as you choose. You will simply repay what you agreed to repay." Andrew picked up the folder and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he looked at the blue velvet box. "What is that?" he asked. Beth opened it and showed him the brass key. "It was your housewarming gift," she said. "A key from the first home where your father and I raised you." Andrew reached toward it, but Beth closed the lid. "It belonged with the letter I wrote before I knew you planned to erase us. I am not ready to give it to you." He left without saying goodbye. Less than 10 minutes later, Madison called. Beth placed the phone on speaker and continued clearing the table. Madison did not ask what had happened. She said Beth was humiliating Andrew, threatening their financial future, and turning a simple banking form into a personal attack. Beth rinsed a plate beneath warm water and waited until Madison finished. "I did not take anything from you," she said. "I declined to surrender something you already owed." Madison accused her of punishing them because of one misunderstood conversation. Beth dried her hands and looked at the photographs on her phone. "I heard enough to understand that you wanted the money, the story, and the right to remove us afterward." The line went silent. When Madison spoke again, her voice was lower. "Andrew will never forgive you for this." Beth looked toward the front door where our son had just disappeared. "Then he will have to decide whether he misses his mother or only what she provided." She ended the call and sent the photographs, the original loan agreement, and a brief explanation to Karen. By noon, our attorney confirmed that no change could be made without both our signatures and that the existing loan remained fully enforceable. Beth read the message once, placed her phone beside the blue velvet box, and began writing 3 sentences on a clean sheet of paper. There would be no more undocumented financial help. There would be no private signatures. There would be no invitations accepted when our presence was only useful for appearances. She signed her name beneath the final line, then handed me the pen. "This is not revenge," she said. "It is the first boundary they cannot rewrite." The story did not remain private for long. By Wednesday, 2 relatives had called to ask why Beth had withdrawn a gift after Andrew and Madison had already moved into the house. Beth corrected each person once. "It was never a gift," she said. "It was a signed loan." She offered no further defense. The following Sunday, Diane hosted a birthday brunch at a restaurant in downtown Raleigh. Beth almost declined the invitation, but she decided that avoiding the family would allow Madison to tell the story without anyone hearing the truth. We arrived shortly before noon and took our seats at the far end of a long table. Madison greeted us with a smile that never reached her eyes. Andrew barely looked up from the menu. For the first 30 minutes, everyone discussed work, school schedules, and the unusually warm September weather. Then Diane raised her glass and thanked the family for supporting Madison and Andrew during a stressful week. Madison folded her napkin beside her plate. "Some support has conditions," she said. "We recently learned that even parents can take back a gift when they do not get enough recognition." The table went quiet. Andrew stared at his coffee. Beth placed her fork beside her plate and looked directly at Madison. "Are you speaking about the $240,000? Madison gave a small shrug. "Everyone knows it was meant to help us buy our home." "It did help you," Beth replied. "And you signed an agreement promising to repay it." Madison said the paperwork had only been created for accounting purposes. Beth opened her purse and removed a copy of the original contract. She placed it in the center of the table without sliding it toward anyone. Andrew's signature appeared clearly on the final page. "A gift is freely given," Beth said. "A loan is willingly accepted. The only thing I withdrew was my permission to be erased." No one spoke. Diane looked at Andrew, waiting for him to deny it. He did not. Caleb's wife, who had attended the house party, quietly asked whether the speech about receiving no financial assistance had been true. Madison reached for her water glass, but did not answer. Beth returned the contract to her purse. She did not mention the photographs. She did not describe the conversation outside the study. She had said enough. We paid for our meals and left before dessert. The first payment arrived through Karen's office the next month. It was exactly the amount listed in the schedule. There was no note. For 4 months, we heard nothing directly from Andrew. Beth continued her routines. She volunteered at the library, tended the fall garden, and placed the blue velvet box in the top drawer of her desk. She never pretended the silence did not hurt, but she no longer filled it with excuses for him. On a cold January afternoon, Andrew appeared alone on our porch. He carried no folder, no coffee, and no request. Beth opened the door, but did not step aside immediately. "I came to apologize," he said. "Not about the loan. About knowing exactly how much you loved me and using that knowledge against you." Beth studied his face for a long moment. Then she invited him to sit on the porch. She did not return the brass key. She did not cancel the payment schedule. Forgiveness, she told him, could begin with honesty, but honesty did not erase consequences. I sat inside and watched them speak through the window as the winter light faded across the yard. Madison had mistaken Beth's silence for weakness. Our son had mistaken her love for permission. They had both been wrong.